So, I mean, all that excitement and the thrills and the... Why did you walk away from it all?
Well, it might sound funny, but when I was in college, I was impressed by a couple of books I read. Catch-22 was one of them. And the intensity of that novel made me, I was an English major as well, want to be a writer one day. In all my career in show business, traveling all over the world, trying to keep people alive enough to make their $100,000 a day they were making in some cases, I decided I wanted to try to be a writer before I got much older. We had just finished a big tour with the Commodores and Earth, Wind and Fire. We're on one tour, Commodores were on another one. I had 2 Tony Awards going with Julie Harris and the Belle of Amherst, and Diana Ross I put on Broadway when nobody thought she would sustain a Broadway stage because she was a concert singer. And we did this big thing with the band up on the stage. So the props, we had mime and whiteface working around her. On the opening number, they pulled her dress apart and showed her movies of her life on her gown, and it became theater. And she got a Tony Award for it when Motown told me I was nuts. She sold the place out 23 times. So all that was going on at one time. I was living in LA, England, and New York at the same time. And I ended up on a beach one night after the Commodores had a problem in San Diego where the kids came through the glass doors. They couldn't see the glass. They came through the windows. And we had all kinds of issues there. And I thought to myself, I was shaking and nervous and tired. And I had taken a couple of caffeine pills or something to stay awake. And I said, you know what? This is going to get me eventually. And I went back home, I packed up everything and flew down to the Virgin Islands because I'm a scuba diver. And I went on to become a rescue diver working with a canine unit down there, which prompted me to learn about what's going on in the oceans and sea pollution, which then led as another thing that I ended up writing about with another message in it, that our seas are in trouble. But everything I write it in such a way that it has a positive ending. It's not Armageddon. The rock and roll book doesn't show that everybody who takes drugs, you know, there's no relief to it. It doesn't show that. And everything that I write has a love story in it. Because love, as you know in the universe, is the strongest, single most powerful emotion on this planet.
Yes.
And if you don't have love in the things that you have around you, in your family, or in the stories that you write, or in the places that you go, what's it all for?
The Beatles sung it best.
There you go.
All you need is love.
All you need is love.
So, why now? Why now? I mean, after all these years, pretty much no one's seen or heard from you. What made you decide to resurface?
Well, it's because this concept that I put together is now together. It's called Movies for a Better World. It's a website called moviesforabetterworld.com. I'm on MySpace and YouTube as well, and it's making films without extreme violence, explicit sex, or racism. Films for families. Films that are positive and have good feelings and have a great positive ending to them. The rock and roll story is insane. I won't tell you it's not. I actually held back from what I saw when I traveled, because if I had put everything that I witnessed into that book, it would burst into flames when you open the covers. One time, the Allman Brothers were on tour with an old presidential jet, Air Force One, that was retired and used as a traveling plane, and somebody threw a birthday party for me. I walk on the airplane, first thing I run into is a chimpanzee smoking a cigarette with a Polaroid camera. They say, hold it. I stand there, the chimpanzee holds the camera up, takes my picture, slaps his leg 10 times, because back in those days, Polaroids had a paper you had to peel off the back.
I remember that.
You remember those?
Oh my goodness, yes.
Well, the chimpanzee,
oh yes.
He was trained to slap himself 10 times to give it a chance to come out. So, he takes the cigarette out of his mouth, does that, pulls the thing off, and hands me the picture, and he had half my head in it, almost like it was a real picture. That's how the night began. Well, some of those moments are in this book, and they're funny and they're harmless, but there's also crazy people, and there's also people that get involved in drugs, but when they do, they end up in a negative spiral with nowhere to go. So it's not positive. I had bands that used to get a big kick out of putting on the audience. One of the most gifted musicians that I worked with was Ian Anderson at Jethro Tull. Jethro Tull would come out on stage, and all the kids thought that Jethro Tull was the tripped out acid head group of all the whole world, and it was all a joke. They used to put John, the keyboard player, they put his piano on one side of the stage and the organ that he played on the other, instead of together. Why? Because they would say, John, organ, and John would go, organ, organ, and they would lead him over to the other side of the stage like he was tripping out of his brains, and he wasn't. And they'd play the organ, and Jethro, Ian Anderson would, how do you stand on one leg for 90 minutes and play the flute and sing if you're stoned? You don't. They were backstage eating yogurt, apples, and bananas. But the kids in the audience, because they like getting stoned, thought that they were. So Jethro Tull was the biggest thing in the world. Thick as a brick, and those records were huge, and they had a great stage show. But they weren't stoned. It was just because that's what some of those audiences demanded, and that's what upset me, because I didn't like to see what was happening. You know, drugs have always been around. Drugs are still around today. I'm not being foolish by saying it's all over with, because that era is gone. In some instances, it's worse than it was.
Yes.
But the reason that I'm sort of made a presence is I want to help young writers. Sometimes I get talked into working with bands. I don't have a lot of time to do that, but I do know everything that's involved in sort of coaching a band. And I've been hired a couple times to work with new groups and how to get them going and so forth. But writing is the thing, because the power of communication that comes from writing, there's nothing stronger in the world. I used to see guys, if you take a lot of cocaine at once, you can go into what's called respiratory collapse. Your lungs can't hold it, and your bronchial tubes collapse. You then have to have a tracheotomy or you die. I actually knew guys that had the scars on their necks, and they used to like to go around and show their friends like they were proud, like it was some kind of a trophy they were awarded. They would go, look, I've been trached, man. See how cool I am? That, Jim, and reasons, and I could go on for hours and hours and tell you things.
Definite dark side.
Oh my God, I used to see people eat. One time with Ike and Tina Turner were playing in the West Indies, and I was in Martinique on a scuba diving mission, so I went over to the island where they were playing. It was the French West Indies. And I walked backstage and I said hi to him, and Ike Turner looked like a sugar cookie. And that was because he had been taking cocaine and not even getting it in his nose. He was throwing it on his face. He was so stoned. They hadn't even played the show yet. And he was yelling at Tina, and you all know the story of what happened if you saw the movie. I mean, I'm not telling anything that nobody already knows. But that night, especially, I walked out of the dressing room before the show, and I said to the person I was with, let's get out of here. This is going to be an awful show, and the West Indians aren't even going to know how bad it's going to be. Because Ike couldn't even talk. He couldn't even hold his bass, the bass or anything, and the show hadn't started yet. So how do you make those role models behave? You don't.